Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to some all new World of Warships gameplay today on our channel. In this episode we'll be featuring the Tier 5 German destroyer, known as the T22, in a Tier 7 domination game on the map Trident. And for reference, this will be my final gameplay taken from patch 6.2, as patch 6.3 arrived as of last week. The reason I'm featuring the T22 is because this is fast becoming one of my favourite destroyers in game. Now I know you may be thinking at this point, well, isn't this ship one of the worst destroyers tier for tier? That is true in my opinion if you look at the base statistics of the ship and then you compare it to its competitors, which are faster, can be more deadly in a knife fight, etc. But when you scratch beneath the surface and begin to try and understand where the T22 fits in to the overall gameplay of your team, she can be quite potent. And in order to understand that, I feel you need to look at her description, which describes her as a fleet torpedo boat. Now there's two components here. The fleet one is a little bit less obvious, the torpedo one is quite obvious. She has some of the most powerful torpedoes at her tier for destroyers, whereby she has two triple tubes mounted down the centre line, and these torpedoes are the longest range, whereby they have a 7.5 km range, they have a 62 knot speed, which means they get to the target rather rapidly. And with their maximum damage of 13,700, they have quite an average amount of damage at her tier, and with a 68-second reload, you can time that very nicely to your 57-second smoke duration in order to be able to get off some rather stealthy torps from the concealment of a smoke screen. And whilst your base concealment of 6.8 km with camouflage is not too great, it's just enough to allow you to get off some stealthy torpedoes if you play it right. But it's at this point that we move on to the fleet component, and notice how, in our endeavour to make it towards Alpha, we've arrived at the same time as our lead cruiser that came from the north of Alpha. And that's because your top speed of 34.5 knots means you can't rush into an objective, and with the speed booster consumable on, you'll get to a maximum speed of 37.4 knots without speed flags. But still, that's really lacking compared to the top speed of a Nicholas or a Minakaze, whereby for reference the Minakaze with a speed booster goes all the way up to 42 knots if I remember correctly. So as a result, you need to try and get to points with your teammates in tow, or at the same time. And that's exactly what we've done here. So now we're just trying to suss out what the enemy Mayhan is doing. We want to get our torpedoes into that smoke screen they've deployed. And what we're assuming is that Mayhan is going to want to sit in that smoke and use it to fire at our ships whilst capturing A. They were very aggressive in getting into Alpha and then putting up the smoke screen, so it would make logical sense. So we're sitting broadside for a bit, we want to find out what that Mayhan's doing. But at the moment we're not going to get spotted because they're in the smoke and their Omaha's behind the smoke. So what we're doing, we're just going to sit broadside with some high explosive, potentially switching to armour piercing if needs be, more on that a little bit later. And when the enemy Omaha appears once again, we're going to open fire and get spotted. Now watch the smoke screen, the Mayhan will very quickly turn their guns towards us and open fire. But with our 2.9 second rudder shift and our low speed, it actually makes the ship quite manoeuvrable, despite its bulky looking nature. As we dodge a second salvo, we dodge some widespread torps, and we creep a little bit closer to the smoke screen to make sure our torpedoes are going to hit the target. Wiggling left and right here to avoid the incoming fire. And we get the feeling there is that Mayhan who has the radio location skill, as we are being located. And as we creep ever closer, we're still being located, so it seems to match up. Now with the Mayhan sitting in that smoke, for safety, those torpedoes are making their way in, and we notice the Atlanta coming up from the southwestern edge of Bravo towards Alpha. And with our torpedo reload being quite quick, we're getting ready to hit the Atlanta with the next set of torpedoes if the Mayhan goes down. Or regardless really, because the Mayhan will pull back if they see the torpedoes coming. So we rotate around at this point, notice we're stepping no further forward on the minimap than our teammates at Alpha, and this is where the whole fleet component is really summed up. As soon as you overextend beyond your teammates even slightly, you can be punished really hard, as we just punished the Mayhan for sitting in their smoke, leaving them on barely any health, and we'll finish them off now with our 105mm main battery armament, of which we have 4 single firing guns all mounted down the centre line. And the guns on this ship are very weak compared to the 5-inch guns you'll typically find on your competitors, whereby your maximum damage of high explosive being a rather poor 1200, and on top of that your maximum damage of armour piercing, despite the fact it is German armour piercing, of 2200, but you need to get close to make that work, and even then the low calibre of your guns means it's hard to penetrate. You really don't want to rely on your guns too much. And you're going to note throughout this game, we're only using our guns to try and finish off enemy ships or wound them. Now with the Atlanta here, we're making the play to try and force the Atlanta to use their radar. We've gone for smoke, but we're actually drifting behind a landmass off to our port side. The idea being here we're trying to bait that consumable out of the Atlanta, and even if they don't use the consumable, the fact they've been so focused on getting off that rather meaty salvo on us has cost them practically all of their remaining health as they've drifted right into two of our torpedoes. So we used our ship as a distraction because the T22 is quite a beefy ship in terms of its size, and it's one that everybody loves to shoot at, especially with armour piercing because it can receive very nasty penetrations or even high explosive we've seen there. But it's cost the Atlanta practically all of their remaining health, whilst we only lost 25%, so it was a fair trade. And now we're opening up with some armour piercing against the Koenig, even though they get rushed down by a friendly Farragut. Well played to them. And the reason we're using armour piercing here pretty much at all distances against anything other than a destroyer, although that's going to change in a second, is because the low calibre of the guns means that when you use high explosive it does very little damage, and with your 5% fire chance as standard it's very difficult to set fires unless your luck is with you on the day. But the armour piercing can get some very strange penetrations, as we just saw there on the Omaha, picking up 726 with a single shell at our maximum range, i.e. 10.7 kilometres. And now by sitting amongst the fleet and with our speed booster active, we've detected the T22 coming through Bravo trying to charge down our friendly Myogi. But here you're going to see what happens when a T22 overextends away from the comfort of its allies, whereby the low top speed, even with the speed booster, means it's never going to get the chance to converge on enemy ships that are running away from it if your opponent's got the support of their teammates. And now we're going to go after the enemy T22 with some armour piercing. And the reason we're using that is because it's a German destroyer, sorry for stuttering over my words, and German destroyers are notorious for being susceptible to armour piercing shells, and that carries up typically from the T22 onwards, as I've found when going up against, say, the tier 7, tier 8 and tier 9 German destroyers. So dumping in the rounds here, we're getting the odd penetration so far, but as the distances close we start to really rack up some damage. A 1200 damage salvo there, aimed a little bit high on that one, and in the 5th salvo I believe we picked up 2 penetrations just shy of 1500, so we can see how the armour piercing is doing its job. If we're using high explosive at this point we'd be getting roughly the same damage, but perhaps over time with damage saturation off of the high explosive shells we'd be knocking off modules more lightly, but perhaps not as much damage. And now that the T22 has turned away, they've realised, oh goodness, I have gone a little bit too far forward. But it's too late for them, as we've converged on them, our Miyogis open up with their secondaries and also some armour piercing of their own, and we finish off the T22 for our second kill. But with that play and the fact that we spent a large portion of the first half of the game around Alpha, unfortunately for us our main contribution to the game is now over, and that is the downside of the ship being based around its fleet, i.e. in that description. The fact that you can't take that initiative to go off on your own unless you're feeling really brave or you really feel you've calculated the play, and you can't afford to go charging off into the distance and try and make that solo play, because if you do you'll get punished for it, so you are tied to your fleet. And we typed into the chat we're going to try and take B, and then we have to clarify we'll eventually do it because we're not very fast. But still, it's a trade-off with this ship, and it's one that has to be understood. So what else is there to talk about really? Well, the 11,300 HP health pool is not too bad, and you can soak up some fire as we've seen, but because the ship cannot get away from its foes as easily as others, you do not want to be in a situation where your foe is going to have an extended period of time to shoot at you, because you will find your HP just disappear in an instant, compared to say a Nicholas or a Minakaze, which can run away a lot faster. And for those of you wondering why I'm not mentioning the Russian tier 5 destroyer, it's because, embarrassingly, I can't remember its name, but that is extremely fast as well. I believe it has a top speed of 42 knots, as standard. So as we drift towards Bravo, we're getting closer and closer, but what we're anticipating here is that the Graf Spee is going to turn out towards us, and this is where our low duration smoke can be used for self-preservation purposes, whereby it's not going to last very long, or long enough we should say, to enable you to fire safely from a smoke screen and rack up a lot of damage. It doesn't allow outright aggression, because your guns don't have that overall potency. And even though we do have basic firing training on our captain here, which means we get a 3.6 second reload, and that was a bit of a bad pick on my part, I should have gone for Demolition Expert for that 7% fire chance instead, you can use your smoke to start angling your ship away from the foe, but notice how, when we're not presenting a full broadside, we can only fire off 3 of our 4 guns. We have to present pretty much a perfect broadside to get off the 4th shot. But dumping in the rounds, we are getting some penetrations finally when we rein in our accuracy a little bit. Trying to aim for the superstructure, although that grass spay is really hurt. And I believe we're going to sneak in the kill as they disappear once more from detection. Although we are getting ready for some torpedoes just in case the grass spay gets a lucky break, but it doesn't look like it as our final salvo goes in, and that's kill number 3. So you can use the T22 as well to help finish off wounded enemy ships, but we switched on the speed boost here in order to accelerate rapidly because we think the grass spay may have used their very potent torpedo angles to try and torpedo our smoke. And that's one nice thing as well about your smoke screens, they're short in nature but you can use them to bait out torpedoes. Because everybody loves to torpedo a smokescreen, as we did earlier on. And as we creep into Bravo at this point, our team's got 2 of 3 objectives. It will soon be 3 out of 3 with our contribution, and that is pretty much our roll over with. We are going to do a little bit more damage, but as I said earlier, because we are tied to our low speed and tied to the fleet we support at the start, we don't have the ability to go charging off into the distance as our tier 7 counterparts will in this match and go after the remnant enemy ships. Although this New York you're about to see us shoot at is going to fall victim to our armour piercing somewhat, and this again in a way justifies my selection of that shell type, although I typically would not do this in any other ship at the tier in terms of the destroyers. I'd always go for high explosive. So coming along here, supporting our friendly mast, moving a little bit closer, but things really do feel slow as we get closer and closer to this New York who's heading our way as well, albeit indirectly. And I suppose if you want to look at playing the T22 from a mental perspective, you have to switch off the idea of a destroyer being that solo operator as we said earlier, and you really have to remind yourself, well no wait, think of this ship as a tiny cruiser, and if you do that, cruisers will typically support their battleships just get a little bit further in front. If you apply the same logic with the T22, putting yourself just a tiny bit in front of your team's cruisers or a bit in front of your team's battleships, then it will bode you well, based on my personal experience. And we did pick up a couple of penetrations there against the superstructure of the enemy New York. And now we switched over to high explosive against the Bleacher Visca, and we get off some nice hits to start off with, but our own personal accuracy problems start to let us down shortly. As we're going for our 4th kill, the Bleacher Visca's been very shaky, and we land a couple more shells, but they get behind a landmass, just as we could have got the kill salvo off there. A little bit unfortunate. And the shell travel time is quite long because your shells, regardless of their type, have a 780 meter per second initial muzzle velocity. Similar to the 792 meters per second on your American counterpart, the Nicholas. Albeit the armour piercing rounds in particular on this ship do lose a huge amount of their velocity after they've travelled a short distance, which makes them very strange rounds, because there seems to be that distance, say 5 to 8 kilometres, where they lose a good chunk of their penetration power, but as they go out to the longer distances and you aim at the superstructure, they regain some of their potential penetration power. I know that's not an exact scientific way of explaining it, but I'm just saying it how I've seen it. It's probably the fact the shells are dropping onto the opponent rather than going in at a horizontal angle. So now here's the final issue, which is we can't clean up the remaining enemy ships. Our Bleacher Visca falls victim to the combination of the Bind and the Congo. Our mast is charging forward, and we can see the speed differences between our ships. I believe the mast has a 3 knot higher top speed. And we're just going to have to follow and essentially act as the rear guard ship. If anything goes wrong, we're on hand to get a little bit closer and help out. But otherwise, our job's done. And really, that's all I've got to say about this replay. We'll just watch as we finish off the game. We're at 975 points right now. And the gun range of this ship's not too bad. The only reason we're not turning broadside to fire yet is because we want to get a little bit closer. And I guess one final key thing is the fact the guns of this ship rotate through the centre line, mitigating their somewhat long rotation time. And with the game over, let's take a look at the post-game stats. Well, in what was a rather casual crusade towards victory, we can see that our battle performance consisted of 44,884 damage, which was made up of 65 main battery target hits, 3 torpedo hits, 3 incapacitations, 3 enemy ships destroyed, 3 floods caused, 3 base defends, and 1 assisted capture. Moving on to the team scores, we can see that we just pipped our teammates to first place in terms of base experience earned, picking up 1,718. We merely played our role in this match, supporting our teammates in their initial push towards Alpha. At no point did we try to make any daring plays, we just tried to punish our opponents for actions they made, such as the Mayhem sitting in a smokescreen, the Atlanta coming forward quite aggressively onto Alpha, and then we made our way towards Bravo, helped to finish off capturing it, and supported our teammates wherever they decided to go. We did not do anything special to earn first place, we just did what the team needed from us. Looking at our detailed report, we have two items to note. The first is our distribution of damage caused, whereby 2/3 of our damage was dealt using our torpedoes, indicating that this destroyer prefers to use its torpedoes over its guns, whereby our guns made up the remaining third. But it still also goes to show that the guns do have a place on this ship and should not be forgotten about. The second item is in terms of our defence points, where we tried to hold objectives off of the enemy team's grasp, picking up over half of the defence points with 32 out of 51. And finally, coming on to our credits and experience earned, we can see that after deductions and additions, we walked away with 175,046 silver credits and 5,154 experience. To conclude, whilst the T22 can take some time in getting used to compared to what you may have played previously in the Destroyer class, once you start to understand its quirks, its ins and its outs, the T22 can be quite a key ship in your team's overall success. She's not an independent destroyer compared to the majority of destroyers you will play in, but instead she prefers to sit amongst her fleet and support her team directly, using her torpedoes to cause considerable damage and backing her teammates up in using a 105mm cannon to finish off crippled foes. For that reason, when we read the description of Fleet Torpedo Boat, we can say that the T22 does exactly what it says on the tin. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and fair seas.